Hello there, welcome. It's the 177th edition of DF Direct Weekly, the Gamescom 2024 special. I've just come back for the show. Joining me to discuss it, first of all, Oliver Mackenzie.
Yes, Rich, I'm back on DF Direct after a long week Wukonging and producing some videos with Alex. I am here.
Are you Wukonged out?
I'm a little Wukonged out, I must admit. I've played a lot of Black Myth Wukong over the past few days.
And somebody else has played a lot of Black Myth Wukong and has lived to tell the tale. Alex Battaglia, hello.
Yeah, in my case, I wish I could play it more, but you got to move on to the next project here. I got into chapter 2, but so it goes. Next thing.
Yeah, okay. John is actually still at Gamescom. I left a little early so we could do this direct. And Alex couldn't make it anyway, but we've got so much to discuss. So I guess we should just crack on. Okay, our first news topic of the week, Gamescom 2024 opening night live. Towards the end of the show, we saw a really fantastic Indiana Jones demo. I mean, everything we've seen from Indiana Jones so far has been pretty fantastic. Okay. I still think that trailer that they put out earlier in the year is probably the best game debut trailer I've seen in a long, long time. Anyway, game is looking fantastic. Trailer concludes, logos come up, Game Pass, Xbox, Steam. Okay, yeah, fair enough. And then Geoff Keighley comes out with, we've got one more thing for you. And then a PlayStation 5 logo appears. All hell breaks loose. People seem intent on asking for or demanding the resignation of Phil Spencer, which is one of the most ridiculous things I've ever heard. But it is fair to say that it is it's a contentious thing, and it has happened, and we've got to comment on it. I've got my own thoughts about this, but Alex, I'm going to come to you first on this one.
Oh, probably the wrong guy to ask about this.
For me, because you don't care.
I don't care. So I didn't feel anything when that came up.
You felt nothing.
I felt nothing. I was just excited to see, I guess, more Indiana Jones. And in this case, I guess I'm excited for other people who will get to see it and play it for themselves on PlayStation consoles, PS5 and presumably PlayStation 5 Pro.
Yeah.
So that's really great for them. I also think Indiana Jones is just such a ubiquitous character in popular culture that, especially in North America, where the PlayStation 5 is just, way further ahead than the Xbox, that if you really want to reach those aging Gen Xers who want to play Indiana Jones, probably do it through a PlayStation 5 or PC or something like that. And I feel like, just get more people in there playing Indiana Jones. It's great.
Yeah, that's it really, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Oliver, I'd be interested in your thoughts about this. Obviously, there's a lot of concerned Xbox console owners out there who are wondering, well, what's going on here? If the exclusives for my console are actually going to go multi-platform, what does this mean for the health of the ecosystem generally? And what does it mean for me as an Xbox console owner? What's your thoughts on all of this?
Yeah, I think, frankly, I think when you look at the various efforts that have gone to PlayStation, I think they've been really well received. I think this is the only move that really makes sense from a business perspective, given that reality. I mean, I remember playing Sea of Thieves on PS5 for our coverage, and I was entering lobbies of people who'd never played the game, who had no real idea that this game even probably existed for a long time, whereas I'd played it 5 years ago and, largely been interested in it, but not played too much of it since. So it was not that exciting for me. It was not very novel to me. But I mean, a lot of people don't have every single console plus every single high-end PC piece of graphics hardware. So they're in a position where these games actually do mean a lot to them when they arrive to the PlayStation platform and not just, on Xbox or Switch. But I do understand the backlash because ever since Xbox came onto the scene, really for the entire history of game consoles, it's really been very heavily about high-quality exclusive titles. And I don't know. I think that ultimately these are very, very similar boxes. I don't think that there's that much exciting in a game existing only on PlayStation or only on Xbox. Perhaps that changes a bit with the addition of the PlayStation 5 Professional into the mix. But it doesn't really matter that much to me. It's all plastic bins, plastic boxes, like you say, Rich, with basically the same hardware inside. And ultimately, basically what we're seeing here is a situation that I think is probably fated in the cards, that most, if not all, these Xbox titles will end up being multi-platform. So to me, this is kind of already priced in. I don't really put too much stock in any particular game arriving on PlayStation or any particular game arriving across any other platform for Microsoft, because I just think, yeah, this is just the way it's going to be for the foreseeable future. Certainly, that these games will arrive on PlayStation in a very comparable form.
Yeah. Well, this is interesting. I mean, where do we begin with this? I can understand why some people are sort of confused and upset and angry, because the paradigm of the idea of the console is under threat. I'd say there's going to be a transition point. The Xbox of the future. I mean, Phil is literally saying in interviews, prepare for more change. More change is coming. And the hints that he's given so far, I'd say, they're actually really good changes. I mean, just the hint that we're going to see competing stores on an Xbox kind of suggests that it's going to become more like a Steam Deck-like device, in that, it sits on a relatively open operating system. You can install the stores that you want. And then, you also gain all of the advantages of that platform, mods, composition, actual competition. There's a lot going on there potentially for the future of Xbox. The present of Xbox, though, is that obviously, we've got the series consoles which haven't quite performed. And, these guys might be feeling slightly concerned, but nothing really changes, does it? If you bought an Xbox, then probably one of the major reasons you bought it is that you had an Xbox before and you wanted continuity from your digital library, which is probably the same reason why a lot of PlayStation 4 users bought PlayStation 5s.
Right.
It's pointed out to me recently that we shouldn't be looking at hardware sales. We should be looking at the monthly users, the active users, and to track that over time. And, I'm told that we'll just see, that those active users are basically the same. Xbox users are upgrading to a newer Xbox. PlayStation users are upgrading to a newer PlayStation, right? So, what you've got to you've got to change the status quo there to actually attract new users. Going for PC the way Xbox did was a good move. PlayStation has followed suit in a different way. What's going to happen next? I don't know. Now, if you're producing games that are going to be going onto a system as open and as widespread as the PC, that's actually fundamentally more impactful than just, porting to other consoles, And, there's obviously the argument that, okay, I bought an Xbox, but if I bought a PlayStation, I could get the PlayStation games and the Xbox games. Well, guess what? That's been happening for years now on PC.
Yeah.
So ultimately, I see it as a good thing. And, we've got to understand that if the amount of people on consoles isn't increasing, and we've had confirmation of that from both Sony and Microsoft, if that isn't changing, but the cost of developing these games is moving into like motion picture territory, up to like $300-400 million, then, obviously they've got to be paid for some way. And the way that's going to happen is through proliferation across as many platforms as will host those games. Xbox users still get Game Pass, right? So, Indiana Jones is still going to be day one on Game Pass on the Ultimate tier, caveat. So there's still that as well. There's so many different components to it. I don't think Xbox console users have actually lost anything as such. Obviously, the other platforms have gained, but that is revenue that's going back into the Xbox ecosystem, and it's just kind of makes sense. And ultimately, that's where I think everyone, bar Nintendo possibly, is going to end up. So, it's going to be a transition. It's going to feel odd. It's going to feel weird because we just don't expect this. We've never seen it before, really. But the direction of travel, we've been moving in this direction for years now. So it's just the next step. I want to sort of take a couple of supporter questions on this because there are some interesting comments that came up. Let's take this one first from Mark Smith. With the buzz/fanfare around Indiana Jones, do you think Xbox should have waited to announce the PlayStation 5 version? It seems that the online discourse I have seen has been mixed to negative about their but wait, there's more moments at the end of their presentation. It wasn't actually their presentation, it was Geoff's. Just should point that out. Should Xbox have given their customers some breathing room before announcing the PlayStation release? The thing is, we've been calling for like more transparency from Xbox for like, ever since these multi-platform rumors hoved into view. We're getting it now, and I think that's generally a good thing. What do you think about that, Oliver?
I think there's no good way to break the news to Xbox customers who are really invested in this platform and people who really, really care about this stuff. There's no good way to say, hey, these games that you've been playing that you cherish as an Xbox exclusive player, if you are really invested in this platform stuff, those are headed to PlayStation, which is a platform that you've grown to dislike. I don't think you're ever going to save those people, unfortunately. And I don't think there's any... Alex is kind of guffawing, but I mean,
I'm
there
just
are
like,
people
what is
like
going
this,
on
right?
here, man? Yeah.
There are people like this, unfortunately, which is the locus of this question, I presume. But yeah, I mean, there's no way to tell people, hey, we're going to bring our games to PlayStation, which I assume is going to be, again, the vast majority of Xbox titles, if not all of them. There's no good way to tell them that. I mean, if they are really invested, you could say all at once, all these titles are going. You could kind of read between the lines and say, okay, these titles are coming, but they're going to announce them one at a time, or you could kind of be left in the dark and just be surprised and very upset when titles do get announced. But I don't think it's Microsoft's duty to solve the feelings of people who have kind of less expectations around console fidelity or something that'll only be on one system.
What do you think, Alex?
Yeah, I think breaking the news, in spite of how I just don't like emotionally understand it, I think it's not easy to convince, this decades-long group of followers, perchance, that things are going to be coming different at some point in the future. And I think that's mainly it. Like you said, these are like adjustments, and I think that's why it's good, at least now, that Phil Spencer is saying expect more change. Unlike earlier at the beginning of the year, where it felt a little bit more, we're experimenting, like their college phase or whatever. And here I feel they're laying the hints a lot heavier about that things are actually going to be very, very different.
I just can't believe you made that. Actually, I can believe you made that analogy. But
I'm sorry, I just had to. But
okay, we've got. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. Please continue.
But yes, I think it's better off now, and I'm like Oliver. I do think I think actually every title's going to be coming to PlayStation in the future. Man, like a lot of these titles would do just, it would be better for them, especially anything that is a multiplayer component.
Yeah.
Like I'm thinking about like the next Gears, and like if it's only Xbox and PC users, that's a good chunk of people. But the PlayStation market is so large, and it's a third-person cover shooter. Like it just seems all like it just makes a lot of sense. And I feel like they should do that. I'm just curious about what the next title announced would be. Starfield's on now it's coming into year 2 soon. It has this Shattered Space expansion. I'm curious if there's some opportunity there to get a lot more Starfield sales. Another thing I'm also curious about is day and date releases, because we've seen with PC titles in the past, if they're not day and date, it actually ends up not probably selling as well as it could, because there has to be like a second marketing and hype cycle that needs to be built up. Not all games have that second wind in them to actually be really successful with late releases on PC. So I'm curious if that is a thing, like if Indiana Jones is only coming to PlayStation 5 later here because maybe the game is quite literally not ready because they only made this decision mid-development at some point. I'm just very curious as to why it's a little bit later here.
I don't know. I think there is still, a transition period to handle, and there is still a lot of console users out there. It's a delicate situation, and it's been really tough to handle, and it's clear that you just can't please everyone with this. That said, let's go to this question from Nusco. Man, he's going in there. He's going in hard, as they say. As Xbox's policies swing wildly from side to side, analysing their strategy feels increasingly futile. It's likely they don't have a cohesive strategy at all. Microsoft, being a stock-driven company, flourishes during booms and goes into survival mode during busts. Now we're in a bust. So Xbox seems focused on their internal conflicts and throwing ideas at the wall while staring at the bottom line. But this bust won't last forever. When it ends, what do you think will happen? Will Xbox emerge stronger thanks to their robust portfolio? Or will they over-milk their franchises into irrelevance like Disney is doing with Marvel and Star Wars? When the next video gaming boom arrives, will COD and Halo still be iconic names? I'm going to tackle this one. It seems to be two questions here. It's really difficult to over-milk your franchises in a world where it takes 5 years to make a game. I would venture to suggest. I don't think that's too much of a problem. You can level sort of accusations perhaps at Call of Duty and those type of games that have a yearly cadence, but they've kind of been established. It kind of works some years, it doesn't work some other years, but it still seems to be successful. Halo, I think, is something entirely different and kind of probably needs a rethink, since Halo Infinite just wasn't quite where it should have been at launch. Took a while to get where it needed to be in multiplayer, and I still think the campaign side of things was just woefully underserved. But let's put that aside for a moment and talk about the strategy side of things. I think there's been a coherent strategy. I just think that it's kind of been drip fed to us in stages. I think the strategy has always been to go multi-platform. I think it just makes sense for the reasons we've talked about. I do think there is some sticking points over the messaging, like 6 months ago, where Phil was talking about, okay, we're going to start with 4 games and see how those go, because they would know the player base. They would have likely expectation levels of how well they would do. They knew Sea of Thieves was going to be pretty monstrously large on PlayStation 5. Mm-hmm. And, ruling out, actually, no, he didn't rule out Starfield and Indiana Jones, but he just said it wasn't in those initial 4 games. And actually, in an interview, I think with The Verge, he said, I'm never going to rule out a game appearing on PlayStation. However, with that said, let's consider Indiana Jones. And, since we're talking about Disney, let's consider the multiverse. I think that you could put out Indiana Jones on the PlayStation in and in all of those separate universes that comprise the multiverse, it's going to be a monster hit. It's a slam dunk. Maybe in the universe where Tom Selleck was Indiana Jones, it wouldn't be quite as big. But yeah, so I suspect that at some point the multi-platform decision was made, and it's just kind of like been maybe some missteps in actually talking about how this was going to roll out. And I think last week we were talking about the ripping off the Band-Aid strategy, just to get it out there. Maybe too much of that news at one time would have been too much. That said, when you've got Indiana Jones appearing on PlayStation 5, all bets are off, I think. I think every major Xbox game will be on PlayStation at some point, but maybe we should be thinking about it in different terms, which is to say that every first-party Microsoft game will eventually appear on every platform that can host it.
Awesome.
And yeah, so, there's going to be a ton of Switch and Switch 2 games, I'd say, which I think is great. It's just that the role of the Xbox is still up in the air, and we know there's a new Xbox coming. What form is it going to take? That's what's exciting me next. And when is it going to come? That's the next thing, because while the existing console paradigm is still sort of, the status quo, it is putting the series consoles in a bit of a weird place, right? Mm-hmm. What could I say? I just think the Band-Aid has been ripped off now. I mean, if and Phil is literally saying expect war change. And, I'm really looking forward to seeing what that change is going to be, because ultimately we want to have thriving console businesses, or gaming businesses rather. And that's going to require addressing the fact that there seems to be a cap on the amount of people out there that actually want to play on consoles. That's the bottom line. I think it's like 200 million, 250 million. I've also seen mooted as kind of this net figure of people that are into console gaming, and it's not increasing. Maybe the percentages between the platform holders shift between the generations, but it's not increasing, which is really sort of concerning when you've got like motion picture size budgets for video games. Something's got to change. And yeah, things are changing. Any final words on this one before we move on? Complete silence. So I think we should move on then. Okay, Gamescom 2024. John and I were at the show this year, and first thing we did actually on the Wednesday morning was to head straight to the Xbox booth, because they were pretty much the only major player in terms of the console sort of platform holders that actually had a presence. And there was a bunch of games there, and I was surprised and delighted to see that STALKER 2 was there, had its own little booth. Any game that's got any kind of aspect of violence to it is kind of locked up in a black room. So you have to queue.
Thank you, Deutschland.
So you have to queue up and go in. And again, we were really surprised and delighted to see that both the PC version and the Xbox version were in attendance. Now, Alex, you saw the game last year, and we were kind of, how could we say it? We were concerned, I think.
Yeah, and essentially, I mean, Phil was also talking about when we met him, but they were just like trying to string up a build and get it up and running for last year's Gamescom show, and the rough edges were very apparent. Issues were very apparent. Here, with multiple delays under the belt at this moment, as well as all that development time that means, the game's now coming out in November. What you saw, at least what you're reporting to me, seems like it's living up to the STALKER name, and also a way more polished experience than what you saw last year.
Yeah, let's go into detail on that because it is important. I'm just going to say what I saw. Went into the booth, went straight to the Xbox. It definitely was an Xbox running the game. The XTK was there. It was powered on. Heat was coming out. This wasn't any shenanigans of fake consoles with PCs behind the scenes. It was definitely
the good old days.
Yes, the good old days, the classic 2012, 2013 era. But no, it was the Xbox build. And the first impression that I had was, wow, image quality on this is really, really good. It was just a title screen, right? But it was, a real-time 3D scene. It's like, image quality on this is really good. So before I actually dipped into the game, I went into the graphics the display menu rather, to see what graphics modes there are. No graphics modes. Interesting. Started the game, and essentially it's running with an unlocked frame rate at the moment, and but the image quality is really, really good. Now, I think we could all agree that Unreal Engine 5 titles have kind of suffered image quality wise because of super aggressive upscaling, but this was looking really, really clean. So I'm kind of curious to know what resolution it was running at. You can never tell at a show floor, but it looked really good. Performance, it's, well, the cutscene that it started with was kind of highly variable, but once you're into gameplay, it was 60 and thereabouts, I would say. So, bearing in mind there's still development work to go, it was actually really, really pleasant to see that. And the whole experience was much more polished than it was when we saw it last year, Alex. So what can I say? I'm quite excited about this now. The build that I played wasn't perfect, far from it. I mean, you'd expect that, right? A couple of things that sprung to mind. I noticed John was on the station next to me, and I noticed him dipping into the settings menu to change the controller sensitivity. It was way, way, way too high. He had it on the absolute lowest. And it was still really, really, really sensitive. And the loading times when you die were very, very long, intrusively so. That was a bit of an issue. Thing is, though, this is an entirely different conversation to what we were having last year, where it was like, wow, this is, we've got concerns about this. When's it coming out? How much time have they got to polish it? Seemed like there was foundational work to be done to get the game into shape. Now I'm talking about controller sensitivity and loading times, which is basically, a vastly improved situation. I don't know if you saw any of the additional assets that have been released, but Alex, how do you think this is shaping up based on what you have seen?
Well, what I've seen is that it actually does. So I was originally a little bit scared when they showed off the initial trailer of the game. I thought it looked graphically really great, but I was afraid that it would lose a lot of the free form aspects of STALKER to be, like a more polished current generation experience. Like there's vast worlds of difference in terms of like what Stalker is in terms of the original Stalker's polish versus its freedom versus, for example, like a AAA game these days. They're very different. And I was afraid it would lose that, but all the footage I've seen so far actually seems to be very open-ended, a lot of you tackle it the way you want kind of thing, as well as the interactions between the various groups in the game, both mutants and human factions. So I was actually very interested to see that. On a technical level, the footage has been making it hard. I'm always curious about hardware lumen versus not hardware lumen. The footage has been super great for that, for me to really ascertain that in a great way. Another thing that I'm very curious about is a lot of the footage has had, you can tell me if the Xbox build is this way, no motion blur? Is this true?
I think
don't know.
You might be right there.
And so I think I'm always curious about those things. Those are probably settings that'll exist on PC, but they've been demoing the game with little to no motion blur, which I found interesting because usually UE they but per default they always have
it's
that.
It's
It's
there.
there. And I'll this is presumably going to be later UE, and based upon our recent interactions with like FSR2 and stuff, I'm very curious if they'd use TSR on console, which could be one of the reasons why it looks so good, because later versions of TSR, we really haven't seen it. A lot of the games that have been using later Unreal have been using FSR. So TSR is better, just is in Unreal at least. So if they're using that on console, that could be one of the explanatory factors of why you thought it looked pretty sharp.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think the other takeaway for me is that it is definitely a Stalker game, right? That's it's even down to the little janky stuff that you would kind of come to expect. It's there. So yeah, if you love that game, if you love that atmosphere, if you love that vibe, I think it's really shaping up very, very nicely. And this was actually the game that John and I, it was our beeline game. We had to see that one first. We actually queued for like 3/4 of an hour to see it.
Oh my.
Yeah, but we really wanted to see it, and we stuck around, especially when we heard that they've got both the PC and the Xbox builds in that little booth of theirs. So yeah, it's looking good. Oliver, have you taken a look at any of the new footage?
Yeah, I have, and I've obviously heard your impressions and John's impressions. I'm glad to hear about the image quality that does, to me, suggest TSR, if indeed they are using a later version of Unreal Engine, TSR tends to be far superior to DLSS and at a comparable performance level.
FSR, you mean?
Oh, yes, sorry. Far superior to FSR, yes. Does tend to be a lot better. I do hope they can get performance into a good spot. If it's GPU limited, drop resolution, upscale to 1440, provide some mode to offer higher performance. And if that's off the table, then just provide different options for frame rate capping. There are a million ways to configure this. Obviously, we've seen a recent case where a developer configured a game in 3 totally new ways. Wukong,
how novel! I was not expecting. Bespoke.
So, bespoke ways, totally new ways, really exciting stuff. But obviously on Xbox here, you get 120 hertz LFC VRR, so that can clean things up to a large degree if you have a compatible display. But yeah, it's nice to see Unreal Engine 5 looking pretty good here. I haven't looked through this in too much detail, but it looks like there could be some Lumen use in here. Possibly VSM.
Yeah, I think it's software lumen based
software
on
lumen. Yeah. It does look pretty good, and it's nice to see another example of a really good looking UE5 game out there, hopefully with decent performance, and certainly looking a lot better than the game did last year, because I remember hearing some stories about that, and it was really not in a state that really indicated that the game was close to ship. Obviously that wasn't the case. They delayed it a little bit, but I'm glad to hear that it's in decent shape now.
It was difficult for us last year, I think, Alex, because we really want a great Stalker game, but also we're acutely aware that effectively it's being developed in a war zone, which which is
so you feel for them immensely, and so this is one of those games where you want it to have a success story as much as possible due to the development stuff. It's like when I think it was around the time Metro Last Light came out, there was some great reporting about the conditions at 4A's office in the production of that game, and they just sounded wild. You just couldn't believe it. And here, I imagine the story is somewhat similar, that there's just a lot of production challenges out of the fact that, you know, there's rolling blackouts and missile sirens going off and basically anything that can disrupt real work and emotional things. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to covering it. I hope we get, like always, I want to build always a good deal ahead of time so that I can cover it in good pacing, because one of the things that happens if you don't get a game far ahead of time is that you're kind of rushing to hit embargo to make sure that people will watch what you're talking about, and that's that can actually impact, not I want to say the quality of the coverage, but the breadth of things it can cover. And I want to cover a lot of bases and for games that I cherish.
Well, this is the thing, right? I mean, the concept that a development team can spend 5 years on a game and then you're given 5 days to review that is just nuts.
It's nuts. I have no idea what the basis for that is.
I think it's, you know, obviously is the kind of rush to the finish line, which means that they want you to see the final game. But there is value in just giving a build early to reviewers with notes. This is going to change. This patch will arrive at this date. And we've got some idea of how we can then, you know, pace the coverage that we're going to do.
Right. You can get so
forward.
much out of that, just even early with patches. You just need to prep the reviewer.
The other thing, of course, which we've done in the past, is that if we do get early review code and we see things that, you know, maybe could be tuned or improved, we can feed that back to the development team straight away. And, you know, that's happened actually several times, and it, you know, makes for a better game. You know, just a win-win as far as I'm concerned. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but Stalker 2, looking forward to it. I think actually what you're talking about, Oliver, the inclusion of graphics modes could be a good thing. It's kind of ambitious what they're doing now without them. Right. But, you know, choice is a good thing for users, I think. Okay, let's move on. Next news story of the week, and this one is really, really interesting. Out of nowhere, as Final Fantasy 16 was confirmed for PC. And not just that, but the playable demo was released for PC. And not just that, but the playable demo is essentially the same as the playable demo they did for the PlayStation 5 version of the game. I think both of you guys have taken a look at this. I have not even laid eyes on it. I have not seen a single pixel of the Final Fantasy 16 PC port. I'm very curious to hear what you've got to say about it. I'm just looking at the notes on the docket there. I've got some idea. Who wants to start here? Oliver?
Yes, so I took a look at the game on a reasonably high-end PC, my own PC here, and I took a look at the game to evaluate the visuals with max settings and 4K DLAA, just to see exactly what the big deal is with this PC version. And it does look better on PC. LODs appear better at a distance, so I've got a shot here with some towers in a distance, where clearly the models on PC are more detailed. They're showing more visible geometry. They look better. Again, these are very standard PC upgrades that you would expect to see, frankly. The thing that was surprising to me is that image quality isn't that great, especially with things like depth of field, specular aliasing, fur, like on Benedicta's outfit, you get that nice fur fringe or that feathery fringe. It does not look great on PS5, does not look great on PC. And again, I was playing with 4K DLAA trying to evaluate this stuff, and it was just super aliased.
DLAA is essentially a nuclear option for image quality.
It is a nuclear option. It is the very best.
Yeah, it's completely.
It's better than DLSS quality. It is to me an extravagance on PC. I rarely use DLAA. You know, I'd rather my power bill be a little bit lower. Even, you know, I would rather play with DLSS in performance mode or quality mode or balanced mode. But yeah, here with DLAA, I mean, I was still getting a lot of specular aliasing on armor, lots of aliasing on little fine details. I think the depth of field might be still at a pretty low resolution because there was still a lot of aliasing with things that were intersecting with that depth of field. The overall image quality is definitely better, but some of those transparencies, and especially that specular aliasing, not too flattering. And again, I wouldn't harp on this so much, but I was just expecting a bit of an improvement from the PS5 that's a little bit bigger than what we're seeing here. There are also a couple other differences. So foliage looks a little bit denser at range, possibly some LOD differences, but it certainly looks like there are better defined leaves and structures to the foliage and bushes and things like that. But then there's another bit of weirdness that I stumbled upon when I was doing these comparisons, which is like the textures. So the textures look mostly the same, if not completely the same. That's to be expected, not a big deal. Textures on PS5 looked fine. I'm not complaining about that. But weirdly on PC, again, with settings maxed out, I had some weirdly poor texture filtering. It looks almost identical to PS5 in the shots that I saw, that I was testing. It looks to me by eye, Alex might be better at this, but it looks to me like 4 times anisotropic-ish. It looks like very console setting. So,
Right.
I don't know. I don't know what to think. I mean, this is obviously not a game that has been released yet. This is a demo, but these issues are just like a little odd to me, especially with the anti-aliasing, because I don't know, DLSS can struggle with things like depth of field, but usually it does a better job with things like specular aliasing than I'm seeing here. But I think Alex has some thoughts on PC performance that are perhaps more interesting than mine, so maybe he should share his opinions there.
Yeah, I tried it out on the mid to low spec PC that I've been using for coverage for a long time now, and I stuck to an older GPU because I was curious about that. So it's the Ryzen 5 3600, 16 gigs of DDR4, 3200 megahertz, as well as the RTX 2070 Super. So right now, a GPU with a 2019 vintage, it's getting old. It's getting old. Mm-hmm. And I guess I was concerned rather quickly. A thing that Oliver didn't mention, but I think does require mentioning, is the frame rate capping in cutscenes. So there's nothing wrong with 30 FPS cutscenes per se, but on PC, when you go, the game does transitions on camera cuts from cutscene graphics to in-game graphics. And then if those are at 30, but then you transition to 120, it looks really jarring. And the initial transition from 120 to 30 in a cutscene also will, there'll be a frame time lurch as it does it, and it just won't look good. It just really won't look good. And there's also interstitial cutscenes that are done via FMV files, like it was on the PlayStation version. And you can see them a lot more when you have a super high-end PC, I would feel. So those things aren't great. There were probably other differences with an earlier version of the demo, but I only tried the latest one as of Friday. What is the date? Friday, whatever the day is. It's the 23rd.
Yes.
So I've played that version of the demo.
The
another
year
thing
of our Lord 2024.
Yeah, the year of our Lord 2024. And another thing, I really like the settings menu. I liked the design there. So let me say that. I usually don't like Square Enix, what they do for some things, but the settings menu design seemed really good here. Shader compilation done at the beginning of the game. But Ryzen 5 3600, RTX 2070 Super, boy, this game is heavy in a number of ways. Unsurprising given what we saw on PlayStation 5 when trying to achieve 60 FPS there, where it was just kind of woefully under and the image quality really suffered. Here on PC, trying to do 1440p with their cool DLSS dynamic resolution mode, which I always love. I love dynamic res on PC. It wouldn't muster it always, especially in any of those scenes, like the rare unlocked kind of cutscene-ish moments, as well as just in generic gameplay. It was GPU limited. A concerning thing though that I saw is that when the cutscenes are transitioning to different locations, there was a machine gun tap, like of like 80 to 100 millisecond frames as it was doing that. So, and the dynamic res would go really low, and you'd see like a sparkle all of a sudden in between these cutscene transitions. It happens multiple times throughout the prologue area of the game, and it really led to a not very polished feel. That the PlayStation 5 version, obviously, I thought the cutscenes were very polished in the PS5 version in spite of 30 FPS. So that didn't feel great. And the most concerning issue to me is when I didn't even play any further because it just bothered me so much, but you get all the stuff's done, you do the combat prologue teaching thing, and then you just like take control of the character in that little market square in front of the city gates. And it was stuttering so much on this Ryzen 5 3600 PC 2070 Super, regardless of resolution settings. I originally was thinking like, what's going on here? I busted down the resolution to 720p ultra performance mode and unlock the frame rate, and there's just massive 80 to 100 millisecond stutters on this machine just while walking around. And I read some stuff online, and other people are getting this too. Oliver did not experience anything like that on his rig. I cannot even begin to describe what it could be. It is bad, 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 bad. That rig is completely unplayable if that is the experience. So that's not good. Another thing that I noticed, but could explain a little bit about what Oliver was seeing, is that when I did turn the game down to ultra performance mode, I made multiple recordings, but when I did turn the game down to ultra performance mode 720p, that's a really low internal resolution.
Yeah, it's 240p, Alex.
Yes, but it was obvious to see that motion blur post-processing resolution was done at internal resolution, which is actually against Nvidia guidelines. So like you'd turn the camera and it would just be 240p. It looks incredible. It went straight to, like SNES territory there when you turned the camera. It was really cool. But that's not good. And that could partially explain some of Oliver's concerns regarding image quality, minus the whole anisotropic filtering thing. But right now they've patched a demo for a game, which I just find really curious. Like I'm really wondering what the development strategy is here. Is the demo supposed to get people interested in the game?
That leads me to this question from Chris Toffin. Square Enix released the Final Fantasy 16 demo alongside the PC announcement this week, and they've already released a patch that improves the image quality of all upscalers, fixes UI and gameplay bugs, crash fixes, and promises to improve stuttering and performance in the future. This seems like a great way to have a massive audience with a variety of hardware configurations help unofficially perform QA on their upcoming PC release. Should more companies do this? Well, I think if there's actually evidence of improvements, then yes, is a good answer to that. On the flip side, what you're doing is giving users a first impression that the game isn't particularly performant or has issues.
Right. Exactly that. I think if this was a first-time experience and you thought a demo released just a few weeks before a game should be representative, which I think a lot of people usually do think that, then you'd maybe be really turned off by this demo, as I was. But the idea of crowdsourcing a game's improvements over time, like an EA title, early access title, I think that's great in the end, as long as it's, I think when they advertise the demo, maybe they should say it's a demo, but we're also, as part of the advertisement, they should say, we're going to use this to improve the final game. And I think that'd be great to know. Some other notes here, CompuSemble has reported that the game is going to be using direct storage on PC, GPU decompression. This would make it the second outward-facing title that would be using it. And I'm very curious about that because I didn't like the debut actually too much in Ratchet and Clank of that technology. Wasn't impressed, to say the least. And Nixie's apparently wasn't either, based upon our conversations with them. So yeah, I'm very curious to see what effect that has on GPU limited performance in this title. Does that explain that awful machine gun fire of stutters that I saw in the cutscenes? Does it? I don't know. I'll have to wait for the full game.
I have my own thoughts on performance, if I can chime in. So my counterpoint to Alex's point is it runs fine on my PC. No. So I was playing post-patch on my i7-13700K and 4090 system with 32 gigs of DDR5. Running it at 4K with DLSS in performance mode at max settings still. So it was running at a pretty consistent 60 FPS. Uncapped, it was about 100 FPS for me. It seemed like 100, 110, somewhere in there. But at 60 FPS, just trying to see if I could achieve like a reasonably stable 60 FPS, I was getting some minor frame rate drops in gameplay, couple frames here, couple frames there, sometimes coinciding with traversal, maybe once or twice, but in general, just kind of like, couple frames here, couple frames there, not a gigantic deal. For me, the cutscenes were running at 30 FPS, but they were running at a more stable 30 FPS than what Alex is describing. There were some frame rate drops in the cutscene still, so sometimes it would drop frames. There would be 50 millisecond frames, basically. Not huge stutters, but I don't know why that is. Like, again, this is a game that really should be running the cutscenes at 60 FPS, at least for me. Running at 30 FPS is kind of ridiculous, and then dropping frames on top of that is just kind of insanity, but they're kind of like randomly dropping frames all over the place. For positive things, I didn't notice any shader comp. There is a shader burn. It took like 27 seconds on my system. It was super fast. Obviously, this is a smaller demo, but it's still okay. And the frame rate caps, I did test out like the 30 FPS cap, and they seem to work correctly without frame pacing issues.
Great.
So
that's good.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe the game really struggles on lower end CPUs. This is a demo. Things could change. But on my system, it was okay. It was not horrible. It was not great. It was not what I expected from this port, frankly, with all the issues with anisotropic filtering, the issues with image quality. And in my case, yeah, there is the reduced res stuff that could be playing a factor in some people's experiences. But I was playing at 4K DLAA, so it should really be okay there. That's kind of a brute force approach. But yeah, I mean, I did at least like, frankly, that the settings for most visual options were just like low, medium, high, instead of like low, medium, high, ultra, nightmare, super nightmare, ultra special nightmare.
Yes.
Like we haven't seen PC titles.
Championship edition hyper fighting.
Yeah, I appreciate. Or like Wukong with very high and then cinematic, which is, its own little special category of quality, I suppose.
Yes.
But yeah, it's nice having something a little bit more straightforward that's a bit more honest with you, like low, medium, high, screen space reflections on, SSAO on or off, whatever. That's a bit more honest to me. VRS on or off. There's not as much nonsense in that to me. So that was positive at least. But yeah, they have some work to do. Clearly they have some work to do.
Very curious also about that VRS. It did say it degrades like quality of certain screen elements, something like that. I think that was the main description. But I was curious if it was tier 2 or tier 1. No.
I'd be curious if it was on PS5 as well.
Right.
I didn't notice it, but it could be.
That would be an interesting surprise if it was. But yeah, I guess when it comes to release time, this is like we're going to be finishing off all this coverage, and then this just kind of came out of nowhere. And then after that, I think is God of War Ragnarok. So it's like there's a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot going on, as we like to say.
Yeah, and I want to cover every game to the greatest depth possible, but we'll see exactly what happens here, given the weird structure of releases that we see right now.
That said, this demo does give us a bit of a heads up. And,
it does, yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely useful in that regard. Any final words before we move on, or should we just crack on to the next topic?
I love Final Fantasy 16. Great game. Looks beautiful visually. I mean, I love the way that it looks, even now playing through the game again. It looks fantastic, but it deserves a high-quality PC port, and I'm worried we're seeing another Final Fantasy 7 remix situation where it's just not a good port. In this case, you can't blame Unreal. It's kind of on Square Enix, right? So hopefully they can sort this out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, let's move on. Okay, I'm actually going to start this one with a question from a supporter called Thomas Trala. Hey, DF team, exclamation point. What are you most excited for that has been shown at Gamescom? Are you surprised with anything missing that you were expecting to be shown? The second point, I think, was if you go back to E3 time, Microsoft had this amazing showcase of games. And it was actually quite surprising that fair few of them didn't actually show up in playable form at Gamescom. So that was a bit of a disappointment. That said, they still had a big bunch of games, like Little Nightmares, for example. Little Nightmares 3 was there, Space Marine 2, lots of stuff there, but not quite the sort of gigaton releases that were sort of queued up there, E3 time. But going back to the first point, what are you most excited for that's been shown at Gamescom? This is the sort of thing that I kind of live for in this job. A really fantastic looking piece of software or hardware. In this case, it's software. And the game is Black State on PC. It's from a really small Turkish developer called Motion Blur. And it was at the Nvidia booth. Now, kudos to Nvidia for basically giving this game a platform. And boy, it deserves it. The lighting of this game, the ray tracing, it's absolutely phenomenal. I've got my own thoughts about this, but you've got some footage there, Alex, and obviously you're the king of ray tracing analysis.
Yes.
Share.
Well, I mean, I had to ask you, it is apparently an Unreal game.
That's right.
But the ray trace reflections they were using did not suffer from lumen issues, which is very, very interesting.
Yeah.
At least as I could see based upon the footage provided. And I was just really curious about what the heck they're doing there. So the game kind of, at least visually, reminds me of Metal Gear Solid 5 plus kind of archviz, or architectural visualizations.
Yes.
And I really like that kind of clean room look to a lot of the environments here. I really like that a lot. I also, I'm a big fan of any game that has like high quality textures on a lot of objects too, that are very consistently applied across the environment. Here it looked like that, and I was a really big fan of that. Gameplay though, it's very interesting. There isn't a lot of stealth action games that are kind of playing like Metal Gear Solid, and this game really did seem like it's trying to be like Metal Gear Solid based on the gameplay I've seen. Like there's a niche there that is missing since MGS5 came out. I actually don't like that game too much. I love Ground Zeroes, but I don't like MGS5 too much. After I played it for like 80 hours, I say that. And here I would like for a game to play like MGS5, but maybe have better designed levels, as weird as that sounds. And given how it seems like they're a smaller team, they're not going to be doing like, I hope, some sort of like procedural open world stuff. I want like dedicated oil tanker mission where I infiltrate and kill dudes. So that excites me. I'm excited for that. But graphically, I was just like you, Rich. I thought it fantastic looking for such a small team.
What's really interesting is a month ago, a trailer appeared on the Nvidia GeForce YouTube channel, and it doesn't actually have the RT reflections in it. It seems to be the cube maps, and it just looks totally different to what you're seeing here. I do think they are using a custom RT solution because these guys are ex-CG artists, right? They really wanted to do their own thing. And the other thing is, even now, it's incredibly performant. It was 4K 120 with DLSS on a 4090. But the reason it's performant is that it's developed on Ampere. I think Nvidia said it was like they were primarily using 3080s to do this. And so, they just bunged it on a 4090, and it's not even using frame generation. I don't think it's got ray reconstruction in there yet. So it's sort of defaulting to the Unreal Engine denoiser. So, there's quality upgrades to come. But the thing is, the attention to well, there's two things to this. First of all, the quality of the ray tracing. You turn it on and you turn it off, the game is transformed. It's what you might call a control moment, where you played Control from Remedy and it looks great. You turn on the ray tracing and it's a completely different looking, much better looking game. And it's exactly what we're seeing here. More so, in fact, I think, because of the kind of clean visual aesthetic that it's got. And that was just absolutely phenomenal. Secondly, the level of detail that these guys are doing on the assets, it's nuts, to the point where there are we saw like metal poles that have got like different imperfections within the metal pole, and between the same asset, what you would think would be the same asset is actually slightly different, and now obviously the ray tracing plays into that. What could I say? It looks great. I think they've got a Hall of Mirrors effect going on with their reflection technology.
Oh, that's awesome. That's rare. Yeah.
And they were really excited to meet us at Alex, and it's a real shame you weren't there, because I think you'd have been all over this one. And I'll tell you what really sold it to me is that the way they presented the demo was very similar to the way that you present your videos on Digital Foundry when you really want to highlight amazing graphics in focus. It was like a real-time Alex video.
Oh, that's fun, man. Yeah.
And it was just really exciting to see that. Other good news is that we don't see this a lot anymore, but this game is being developed primarily for PC. There is no console version at the moment, as I understand it. The idea is they're going to make the best PC game that they can produce, and then, they'll figure out the console problem later. Which, isn't the most commercially sound way forward, perhaps, but for those of us that really want to see high-end PC showcases, I think that's pretty awesome. Performance is great even now, as I said, but they haven't integrated frame generation yet even. So there's more to come in terms of higher frame rates there. Did you take a look at the footage, Oliver?
I did, and I'm blown away. I mean, the question that I had for you initially, I just saw that Nvidia demo, was like, is this a game? Is this offline CG? Like, because it looks ridiculous. It looks ridiculous. And then of course I saw the gameplay demo as well, which obviously indicates that it is indeed a game. But yeah, I mean, it just looks insane. Like the environmental lighting and materials and the poly counts, everything just looks incredible. I mean, if you look at the lab equipment, for instance, the way the microscope looks, that little microscope with the perfect reflective detail on very fine and intricate curved surfaces, including self-reflection, like just looks outrageously good. When you mix RT lighting with super high fidelity models, I think the quality bar for what developers can achieve, even with presumably a smaller team like you're describing here, is it just goes through the roof. I mean, it's ridiculous. Very offline level of visual quality here. But I think that one curious thing that I did see with the trailer here was when they were switching between the non-RTX view and the RTX view. The non-RTX view didn't feature lumen reflections, so it was just using cube maps. It was not using SDF-based reflections, not using hardware tier-based reflections. So there were a few things where it's like, okay, well, if they do end up bringing this game to consoles and they do need to lean more on these stock UE5 features, they don't get these extra enhancements. Those are things that presumably they're going to have to, or try to sort out, I think, because that certainly does impact the visual quality a lot. You know, you can do transparency reflections now with Lumen. You can do lots of things they're doing here that aren't featured in the non-Lumen view, or in the non-RTX view. So I think they should probably do a couple things in there on consoles. But also it does look a little bit clean, like maybe a little bit too much in the exteriors. In the interiors, it makes sense. It is a very strange kind of like mix of this research laboratory and then this architectural museum kind of thing. And there's the Mona Lisa in there, and I don't really know what's going on. Some of the animation looked a little bit work in progress, but I also was just thinking like, well, I mean, it actually does look pretty good even still. And frankly, when you look at something like Metal Gear Solid Delta, which is just reusing PS2 animations, I was thinking this might actually compare favorably to that. So it's hard to ding them for that. But yeah, I mean, it just looks incredible. I mean, even the action looked pretty good. Gameplay looked pretty interesting. Like it, and obviously this is in a genre that does not see too many new titles since Hideo Kojima hung up his badge, you know, does not see that much work. So I'm certainly interested to see what they do with this technology, certainly with the game. Just looks fantastic.
I think it's coming next year. I'm hugely excited about it. And I noticed like the debut trailer for the game it posted last month. And I think it was like 40 to 50,000 views on YouTube. And it was like, you know, it almost seems to have gone under the radar and people haven't noticed. Well, you've got to take a look at this now. Take notice of this. It's looking awesome. And I just really loved the way they presented the game. And Nvidia were very, very positive about it as well. You know, going into the way the Nvidia booth was set up is that they had various demo rooms. And as we went into the demo room for this particular game, Phil Scott, the developer relations guy, he's a bit of a legend in development circles. He just sort of whispered, yeah, you're going to like this one. And we went in there just blown away by what's happening here. So yes, I mean, you know, what can I say, Alex? A PC-led game. This is music to your ears, I'd imagine.
It's great. Yeah. I'll be covering this then. I can't wait. Okay,
let's move on. Okay, so we're going to circle back and talk about Gamescom 2024 opening night live. I actually landed in Cologne about 6:30. Rushed to the hotel, set up the laptop to watch it. I could have gone to the main event, but I didn't. John and I watched it online. I put the topic point on the docket here for DF Direct. Best of opening night live, ? Because what could I say? I think it was probably the poorest opening night live we've seen for some time. And it sort of highlighted the inadequacies of the format in general. But let's put that aside for now and talk about games. I asked Alex, for his sort of picks, and he didn't have any.
Well, there's one game I think will be good and interesting.
Okay.
Mafia.
Yes, that did look. The
Old Country.
Good. Except we didn't really see anything.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically a lot of really great shots of the assets in the game, and it is. You know, they posted some screenshots as well on Steam where it was much more obvious that, yes, this is real time. There's like, you can see like Lumen issues there. You can also see VSM issues because it looks like it's using VSM. So it looked real. I guess I was just excited for this because I think the Mafia games aren't too bad. And they've done really great tech stuff in the past. This is them moving to Unreal Engine, which is different. Yeah. And I'm also excited that it does not take place in some North American city. It's really great to see, Sicily. I can't even think of any game that takes place in Sicily. So that's really cool. Also, there's just an entirely different vibe to like the way Mafia is portrayed in Italian media versus North American media. So I'm very curious to see what this is like in the end.
But that was the absolute last game that was shown at
Opening Night
Live. So what happened? Did they have to did we have to break out the defibrillator to wake you up for the...
Well, I mean, I watched this after the fact and I scrolled through it.
Right.
Because like as soon as it like something goes on that I'm not interested, just fast forwarding through that.
Cheat mode. Yeah. In real time, we don't have that. That's a bit of a problem.
Yeah.
You've noted down some other titles that caught your eye, Oliver.
Yeah. Well, I'll start with what should I start with? I'll start with Batman.
Yeah, that did look cool, I have to admit.
Yeah, I mean, Batman Arkham Shadow, it looked pretty high quality, pretty interesting. It's another one of these kind of like high budget, single player focused, kind of aping action game conventions VR title. But I don't know, I kind of felt like this is an Oculus sponsored game. This is a Facebook Meta sponsored game. And I understand it, and I understand there's some merit to making a big VR game. But all the ziplining here and 3D movement just looks like it would be a little bit nauseating, especially that ziplining. It just looks like crazy. And I wonder how much games like this really move the needle. Like I saw last month, John taking a look at Death Game Hotel, which looked like a really interesting concept. I've seen Boneworks, Beat Saber, stuff like that, or full game conversions like GT7 or Tetris Effect. I mean, all that stuff seems to me to move the needle more in the direction of like VR gaining wider adoption, people being interested in the platform. So I don't know. I mean, I thought that it was an interesting showing. I think it's good that we're seeing a Batman game that's more fully featured than the prior Batman Arkham VR experience. Mm-hmm. That was a very limited game. This seems more fully featured. I may well check this out. I do have a Meta Quest 3. I almost said Oculus Quest 3. But
I think what's cool about this one is that it's not an open world. It's very much more Arkham Asylum inspired. In that it's, obviously there is a map there, but it does seem to be more contained, which probably better suits VR, I would say. And the adjustments to the art style, I think, are obviously required because the kind of aesthetic of Arkham as it was probably wouldn't be a good match for VR. Heavy on post-processing and whatnot. That's not really how VR works. But yeah, that did look good, I have to admit. It was a rare highlight. What next?
I think there were a few that kind of like did come out. I mean, there's Civ 7. The only thing about Civ 7 that I think is really interesting, at least to me, is that it is a cross-gen title, even in 2025. We did not see very many PS3 games released in 2018, which would be an analogous situation, obviously.
Right.
I find that kind of amusing. Now, in this case, I mean, it's a very, I'm sure this is a very scalable title. They're also releasing it on Switch, so it makes sense. Why not release it on last-gen consoles as well? Not a big deal there. There's also Borderlands 4, which I think is an exciting announcement, but kind of like with Mafia, although to a greater degree, this is just an announcement. It's not showing off gameplay. It's not really showing off
I can say a lot of people are excited about that, about Borderlands 4, but what I can say is that in the room when Opening Night Live opened and John and I were watching it, we saw that, and John's first words were literally, "Please don't be Borderlands 4." And I said to him, well, maybe it's Tiny Tina 2.
Oh, God, even better.
But then the mask appeared and it was game over, and then the logo. And well, what can I say? It's just not my style of game or John's, but I know that it's actually received a lot of positive feedback, just the fact that it's coming. So, okay.
Yeah, and there are a couple games there that I thought were interesting. There's a new Dying Light, which looks okay. It's kind of a standalone expansion, it looks like, called Dying Light.
Yeah, it looks pretty cool. Dying Light the Beast.
Dying Light 2 looks amazing on PC. Maybe they can bring some of that to consoles possibly this
PS5
time around.
Pro.
Yeah, possibly. Right. Who knows? So that could be interesting. But yeah, in general, it was not... I mean, Gamescom is always... I don't know, there are definitely some good shows in there, for sure. But this year it seemed like that kind of SGF E3 took all the oxygen out of the room with some good presentations. Now maybe there's a little bit less of that to go around.
Right.
But yeah, it was not my favorite presentation, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I just find the show really weird and jarring and disconcerting, and I don't really quite follow it. I don't really understand the concept. It was explained to me afterwards by people at IGN that know what they're talking about. That
Right.
In a lot of cases, it's to bump up wish lists, on Steam. Wish list this game now. It's basically to arouse interest in games that are coming and to build up momentum. And apparently it works, but for me, it doesn't really work. It's, I can't think of it. I've said this to a number of people at Gamescom. I can't think of another type of media that puts on a show like this. It's like, okay, if the movies were doing this show, it would open with a new Avengers trailer, and then, you would have some sort of maybe a low budget Warner Brothers comedy directly following it up. And then you'd have something, odd.
Completely different.
Completely different coming from, maybe South Korea or something like that. It probably might actually be quite interesting. But for the creatives of those particular projects, they wouldn't really want to see their projects lined up in procession against all of this other stuff from other studios and other creators. You'd want your chance to shine on your own terms, right? So it just looks a bit weird to me. And what generally happens is, because the show is so long, it's like 2 hours long, it just becomes a blur of, computer generated imagery, and it really takes something special and different to punch through the further you get into the show. It just doesn't work for me. I just lose interest very, very quickly. I think the other thing which was lacking was, Geoff is the master of producing the Kojima moment, basically a moment within the show where, a big creator comes out to show something new. I guess maybe Peter Molyneux was his bet this time around. I don't think it paid off to a degree of, okay, here's Hideo Kojima with his brand new game or whatever. So, it just felt all very one note to me. And I didn't really enjoy the show at all. Sorry. Any final words before we move on? Guess not. Let's crack on. A final news story of the week, I guess. We actually spent 90 minutes at the Nvidia booth at Gamescom, and we've already talked about Black State, which is one of our highlights of the entire show. Lots of other stuff happening in there, though, and there's actually been a huge amount of Nvidia announcements, which kind of encompass stuff that wasn't in the show. I guess the big announcement, which has got Alex extremely excited about the idea of finishing this year at Digital Foundry on a high, is the notion that Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is actually going to receive a full RT implementation, a technology partnership with Nvidia, which should be amazing, right?
Yeah, especially considering the fact that they have demoed the game so far with zero evidence of ray tracing. Like we looked at the original trailer there, and yeah, none of that. And I think the art is already really high quality.
Yeah.
But the lighting and a variety of other aspects were maybe letting down aspects of it. But here, wow, that could really transform the game like immensely in a lot of scenes, depending upon like what the game is doing under the hood for the normal lighting. And also, I think just going back to Chronicles of Riddick again, because this game seems to be channeling a lot of that. That game was also a technological powerhouse when it came out, and it really made, if you put on the shader model 2.0++ mode, really ran really poorly but looked great, and I would like to see that from the studio again. And just, my goodness, it seems like Indiana Jones is almost perfect for that kind of tech, and I'm very excited for it. And I did not expect it. I also didn't expect it because it's an id Tech game, and
Right.
id Tech, that means we'd have full RT integrated somewhere within id Tech, presumably shareable across studios. Does that mean the next Doom game also has full RT? That'd be kind of awesome. So yeah, like I think I would love that, and I'm really excited now for the end of the year. I was already excited for the game. Now I'm also very graphically interested in the game. As a result of that, I love to see what it would look like in id Tech. It's already super performant. What does that look like now? So yeah, awesome announcement. Totally didn't expect it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the great thing about id Tech. It is super performant. So, obviously a lot of overhead left over on higher end systems for doing stuff like full RT. And yeah, I can't even begin to imagine how that's going to look with some of those assets that we saw. It should be pretty fantastic. Any thoughts, Oliver?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is really exciting. I think the footage that we've seen so far from Indiana Jones shows a game that looks very, very good, but maybe we're not seeing some of that evidence of pushing into new technical directions with id Tech outside of like things like the facial rendering, and the art is obviously very different. And there are definitely some elements in there that I'm sure have been improved considerably, but you still get like SSR and shadow map artifacts in there, things that a lot of engines are trying to correct and trying to fix this time around, this generation. But I always wonder what full RT means in this title, because Nvidia throws that around a lot, and it kind of spans the works from something like Wukong all the way to Naraka Blade Point. So in particular, I'm interested, like, okay, so full RT, shadows, direct lighting, right? Maybe RTX DI, obviously reflections, but what about GI? Like, is that just gone? Is that replaced with RTGI? Or is there a mix of RTGI and baked lighting like Alan Wake 2? Or is it just like baked GI enhanced with RTAO like Naraka Blade Point possibly? Or is it possible that the game's already using RTGI already and it could be an easy swap to something else? Because it's often a lot of work to replace a baked lighting solution. And yeah, I just don't know what they're doing there. But I think, like you, Alex, I'm really excited for what this means for Doom the Dark Ages and other future id Tech titles, because it does suggest we're getting another engine coming online with very advanced ray tracing features in the PC end of things. And that can only mean good things for the high-end PC experience.
Sticking on the subject of full RT, there was a new Half-Life 2 RTX trailer put out. I also got to see a demo of it at Gamescom. And what can you say? The content I saw was from Nova Prospect. Now, the guy who was demoing it wouldn't be drawn on when we could expect the final game, but Nova Prospect's, pretty far into the Half-Life 2 experience, so you'd expect it to be kind of getting there. I don't know. We can only guess as to whether the game is being remastered in a kind of serial or parallel manner across all of the content. It was pointed out to me that, there will be commonality in textures between levels, so it may make sense to target certain levels first, because it would, basically mean that more of the prior levels are already done, so to speak. But that was just looking fantastic. Obviously, full path trace lighting via RTX Remix. It's just totally game-changing, absolutely phenomenal. All of the assets are being remade, geometry and textures. Geometry, they were talking about, in some cases, they were talking about the head crab specifically, a 30x geometric increase in quality and density of. It just looks amazing. The other thing which is quite interesting is that they're going in there and they're actually using Nvidia physics to actually improve the game over the original. So in Nova Prospect, for example, you can like shoot the light fittings and they bob about.
Oh yeah.
There were particle effects from vapor effects from firing the pistol, the Magnum. So that was quite interesting as well. So they seem to be really pushing the boat out on that. No release date given. I suspect it'll be next year. I was hoping beyond hope that because it's the 20th anniversary of Half-Life 2 this year on November the 16th, that it would be coming then, but doesn't look like it, unfortunately. Did you take a look at that trailer, Alex?
Yes, of course. Yeah, I was. Well, I'll just say I just want a game to come out when it's good. So that's what all I care about at these days. And also from my perspective as a reviewer, if there's less games releasing November, I'm also okay with that.
Good point.
But yeah, I thought the trailer's great. I love reading some of the comments online where people were saying like, it flashed to the OG after showing Half-Life 2 RTX, and people are thinking like, oh, that's what the original game looks like. So that means people's memories and kind of nostalgia was making them see the game in a certain light. And they thought that's what it looked like. They thought it looked like the RTX version. And I think that's a good thing, because that means they're keeping well within the art style, color temperature values, and all those good things that you want to see in a remake of a game where it doesn't stray, 50% from all those things. One thing I liked seeing here is that we hadn't seen before was first person movement, combat, weapon assets, etc., which all looked just kind of like the original stuff, except a way higher poly, physically based materials, and also interesting lighting effects. Like I really enjoy the reloading mechanism of the pulse rifle. Like in the original, they have emissive lighting textures there on the little doodads that cycle in and out. And here they're just like lighting up the gun. And I really like that. I actually would love to see Freeform, what this looks like, which you kind of got a sense of, Rich, while you were there. And I didn't get because I was here. But yeah, I'm excited for this one. I'm very curious to see what they do with chapters like the water hazard, as well as what is the name of the highway area? I always forget this.
Highway 17.
Highway 17. Yeah. I'm very curious because those are open environments, and we've seen a lot of RTX Remix in closed environments. But open environments, there's things like vegetation. There's just large expanses of super simple terrain geometry in the original game. What does RTX Remix and their asset changing effort look like in those environments? Very curious to see that.
Okay. Final thing about Nvidia was that I got to see the G-Sync pulsar technology. Now, we've talked about this before. It has moved on. There are actual models coming now from, looks like AOC, Acer, and Asus. They're all 27-inch, 360 hertz monitors.
Easy.
They are LCDs, though, which upset John a bit. Because he really wants to see Pulsar on OLED, but I'm not sure it's possible. The concept of Pulsar is essentially that, it's essentially strobing the backlight in order to improve motion clarity. And Nvidia reckons that this technology increases motion clarity by about 4x. Now, if you're at 360 hertz and, the motion clarity is 4 times better than that, that's kind of like in excess of 1,000 hertz, at which point it's generally considered that the motion clarity problem with flat panels has been solved. I saw the demo that they had, and it did look really, really good. It really was an impressive experience. This is the evolution of G-Sync. Essentially, I think Nvidia has decided that obviously they introduced the concept of variable refresh rate technology. They want to take it onto the next level. They also want to solve the problem of the G-Sync module, which has been becoming increasingly challenging for them because it's a low volume device, and it's expensive to make. And it's reaching, the end of its capabilities. It can only be pushed so far. I'm not sure if they've made revisions, but even so, the solution there has been to partner with MediaTek to use their SoC, which apparently has a state-of-the-art scaler involved, and it's solving a lot of problems here and opening the door to stuff like HDMI 2.1 support on proper G-Sync monitors.
Right.
What can I say? It looked great. Looked really impressive. It's not OLED compatible, but you get pretty decent motion clarity on OLED anyway, I'd guess. But even so, this is really, really interesting stuff. And what can I say? It's great to see that Nvidia are just pushing back the boundaries on other technologies as well. But that's it. That's all we've really got to say about Gamescom. There was a lot there, but weirdly, as always, if you're there, you actually end up seeing less than if you're not
the people
there.
online.
Yeah. But you do have the benefit of a hands-on experience, I guess. So that's the stuff that we kind of targeted. So with that, let's move on to Supporter Q&A, which is the part of the show where every week we choose the best questions put forth by patrons on the Digital Foundry Supporter Program. I say the best questions, the ones that we can actually answer. We're going to kick off with this one. Again, it's Chris Toffin. He's back. Greetings, DF Gents! ! EA recently revealed the PC features for Dragon Age, the Veilguard, and the feature set they tout looks mightily impressive. Steam Deck verified and native Steam app, no EA launcher. Great. Fractional VSync, support for all upscalers, notably a heavily customized FSR 2.2, dynamic resolution scaling, full ultra-wide, including cutscenes, and a dearth of graphical options. I think he means a wealth. A dearth is like the opposite. Most notably to me was the mention of a quote-unquote suite of ray-tracing features that includes an optional quote-unquote selective mode that only turns on ray-tracing in scenes with the most visual impact. What are your thoughts on this feature? Could this be a no-nonsense way to improve performance in most areas, but visuals where ray-tracing does make but the visuals are there where ray-tracing does make a notable difference, notable improvement even? Alex, I'm not sure I'm fully on board with that concept.
Yeah.
Because, basically you're looking at a game that's going to operate at a completely different performance level, and then when some pretty ray tracing arrives, the performance
way worse.
Would drop. I'm curious what you think about that and what you think about Veilguard in general. I actually saw it at Gamescom. I thought it looked terrific.
Right. Well, I did not like the original trailer for this game. I was just like baffled by it. But since then, they've done a lot to redeem that image with the media they've released, and I feel like it's looking better now. Mm-hmm. I was extremely happy to see that blog post because I've laughed at PC-centric game trailers before, like Halo Infinite's like, we've got custom key bindings trailer, and I was like, are you serious?
Okay, yeah.
Like
unlocked frame rate.
Unlocked frame rate. Like, it's like, wow, you've done something PC games have always had. Like, this is amazing. Yeah, pat yourself on the back for that one. But here, these are special options. I don't think I would use or even recommend the option to turn it on and off RT. Usually, if you like consistent levels of performance between scenes, games already have variable load, but this is an even more intense variable load. So that might not be great for those of you who like those things. But it is also an RPG. So people for RPG games, especially ones where you're interested in the narrative and all that, people do actually, they're fine with that. Like worse performance, lower performance, depending upon the scene, especially if you're just supposed to be like taking in an area or engaging in conversation somewhere. So I think could be reasonable for some people, but that's definitely not for me. I'm also very curious that the game's using RT reflections and RTAO. Yeah. RTAO we've seen in Battlefield. What is it called? Battlefield 2142? 2042?
2042.
2042. We've seen it there. I think it helped the visuals there. But the last time we saw other ray tracing features in Frostbite, beyond console games, has been really Battlefield 5. And that's when those had RT reflections that were on a very different branch of that engine that were very custom to that game, and it would never ported anywhere else. So this is presumably different RT reflections technology. So I'm very curious to see what that looks like in the end. Also, this is like a special like ultra setting here just for PC, obviously, and see what that brings to the table. I'm wondering why they aren't using their RTGI solution instead of with RTAO, because they've touted that in the past, public-facing research about it. Maybe the game was developed... Games. Right, yeah. Maybe the game was developed at some point without it, and to change the game's art and to just run through an entire game with RTGI would be too much of this game's development cycle, so RTAO makes more sense. There's a lot of reasons for that, obviously, that I have no input in. But yeah, another game to cover that is like the amount of RT that is just coming out is ridiculous. Like the amount of games, like I just covered Kong. We're going to be seeing Star Wars Outlaw. There's going to be this game. There's a whole bunch of other RT, like really big amounts of RT in the games coming out. And I think just like in 2018, after Turing released, I was wondering what the future would look like, and we're starting to arrive there.
Yeah.
As we now are mid-gen, I really think with games like Star Wars, Wukong, presumably Indiana Jones, my goodness, we're going to be seeing PC versions that look qualitatively very different than their console counterparts. At least we don't know anything about PS5 Pro, what those versions look like. But, I think that's a great place for PC to be in, because the games are not going to be shackled to being just whatever consoles do. And I always want to see that, because I like seeing tech advance, not every 8 to 10 years or whatever, but, it's nice to see something new every couple of years. So I'm excited for that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Oliver?
Yeah, I think Veilguard has a lot of great features on PC, and I hope the fact that they are adding like all the things that he mentioned, like DRS, custom FSR2, tons of graphics options, lots of ray tracing in there. I hope that does mean that the game is coming in pretty well, not coming in too hot like we've seen with a lot of games recently.
Yeah.
The demo they did show off looked quite polished, and they showed off some extended gameplay. They're not scared of that, so that looks pretty good. Like Alex said, the RTAO, which we also saw, I believe, in Dead Space.
Oh, I forgot about that. Thanks.
Yes, Dead Space last year. And the addition of RT Reflections in a Frostbite game, that's certainly very promising. But yeah, I don't really know about this particular idea, because like Alex said, it seems like a way to make the load vary way more, and I just don't think that's what you want. I don't think you want to add inconsistency to the game, just because some graphical features might make more of an impact in some scenes. I really just do not like at all inconsistency in games, so I'd rather have a lower average frame rate than target certain visual features based on the scene. That's my own personal opinion. People can disagree, obviously, but I'm not a fan of that.
Okay. I did actually see it at Gamescom. I think I said that. And it was running on a laptop 4090, and it was looking really good. It was looking really polished. I think that's the good news more generally about the game, is that, it didn't seem to have any sort of obvious issues that you often see with pre-release code for games that are quote unquote coming in hot. The ray tracing did look really, really nice. What can I say? It looked, had a nice presentation about what it's actually doing in any given scene, and it does enhance the game. It does look great. Nice to see Frostbite's hair rendering technology put through its paces there. I just think generally the art direction was fantastic. It just really looked good. It looks like a great game. Very, very promising. In terms of the ray tracing features turning on and off dynamically, which seems to be the idea here, I'm not particularly keen on it. One thing I did notice is that there was, when the scenes were really, I don't even know the resolution it was running at, I suspect 1440p, but when there was a lot of combat effects in play, it did seem to lag a little bit, did seem to slow down, but generally the performance was fine on the demo that I saw as well. Very, very promising there. I will be interested to see how this selective mode actually works, though. It could maybe be okay for, if you're working with a frame rate cap, possibly. I don't know. And of course, the extent to which it plumbs into those systems like dynamic resolution scaling. Anyway, let's move on. This question from very professional Dodo. Hey there, folks! ! Been thinking about the Black Myth Wukong PS5 exclusivity, and after seeing the performance review you made, I'm now fairly confident we have a Baldur's Gate 3 situation on our hands all over again. If it runs this poorly on a PS5 to the point we're seeing frame gen from 30 to 60 and still struggling occasionally, how on earth could an Xbox Series S run this game? Oliver, you did a lot of performance testing. What do you think?
Yes, I actually don't think it's an analogous situation, because Baldur's Gate 3 had two different problems on console in my view. The first one specific to Series S, and the other problem specific to all consoles that ran the game. On Series S, you had the split screen issue, which was presumably due to lack of memory, and that's kind of a harder limit than the kinds of limitations that I suspect Game Science would encounter with Wukong. And then there's also that issue in Act 3 with CPU performance. But Wukong does not appear to be badly CPU bound in general play outside of like traversal stutters. So achieving something in the vicinity of 68 on a consistent basis should be more possible here. Like the decision to use frame gen in particular with this title is just a very strange choice. So I don't really think that reflects on the power of the PS5 in this title. I don't think that's necessarily linked here. On Series S, I would expect that the game would struggle a little bit more, but when you look at UE5 titles on Series S, there is a path to achieving decent visuals at decent performance levels on that engine, which is basically you turn off lumen reflections, you strip back settings, you make a ton of alterations behind the scenes under the hood, and you reduce the rendering resolution. And UE5 is actually in some ways a little bit more forgiving maybe than some other engines because it doesn't tend to be super, super, super heavy on VRAM. So it actually is often okay in terms of scaling it to the Series S. Even like if you look at a game like Hellblade 2, I did a comparison piece on that on Series S versus X, and I had a hell of a time telling which one was rendering with better textures. That they looked very, very similar because of the texture streaming system in Unreal. So I imagine it doesn't help having to ship on Series S. It could well be the reason for the delay, but I wouldn't expect any like crazily undue out of left field kind of issues with Wukong outside of the issues that they may have imposed for themselves.
I was about to say that.
I wouldn't expect anything
trip over your own
crazy
feet while porting.
Yeah.
Like Oliver, I also see the Series S here not so challenged by this game. The PC also showed off options to scale things beyond resolution, I think very well. The low RT setting, for example, kept like generic world lighting. Apparently, reading online that if you set it to low, it's like does like cube map lighting with some sort of indirect shadowing system. Which I thought was interesting. And so there are ways to scale it, and we've seen other titles scale UE5, some better than others, but I don't think that is the issue here. I think they obviously are not the hugest studio, and they don't have the console experience, and I think it's one of the reasons is just the available market for the game isn't such PS5 territory things if you look at the Steam situation, as well as, you want to just bid off what you can actually chew for the moment. And in this case, working on 4 separate versions of the game, including the fact that the PC version is multiple versions essentially in one. I think it's just reasonable to get the game out later, but I think Series S should probably be fine here as long as they don't make such strange decisions in the modes that they choose for the game.
Yeah, I was actually sitting in a cafe in Cologne when the video came in, and John and I sort of dipped into the YouTube channel to check it out before we put it live, and I was kind of mystified by some of the choices that were made. We're currently looking at seeing quality-wise what choices were made on the settings there relative to PC. And I'm very interested to see if there are just better choices to be. Well, it's obvious that there are better choices to be made there in terms of getting a better game. The 30 FPS mode should be 30 FPS. That's pretty much a given. A balance mode at 45 FPS was bizarre. There isn't any kind of display out there that's compatible with a PlayStation that would give you a consistent result there. Kind of baffling. Performance mode using frame generation from 30 to 60 and having problems there even. That's just fundamentally a bad idea. It feels like an afterthought almost. It shouldn't be done. AMD this is the problem when technologies like FSR2 and frame generation come along. There are clear guidelines given by AMD, but some developers just ignore them. You've got to have a high base frame rate to work with frame generation. I don't think that's too much to ask for. So the idea that you don't have that and you just use it anyway, it's just not a good idea, particularly when one of the key points of having a performance mode is lower input lag, and this actually raises it quite noticeably. Mm-hmm. Not great, but maybe the Xbox version is a chance to actually revisit those choices and come up with better ideas for all console versions.
There's historical precedent for that, by the way, with Bloober's masterpiece on Xbox Series X and PlayStation 5. What's the name of that game?
The Medium.
The Medium, where the PS5 version has completely different optimization choices, better ones. But they never, I don't think they backported it to Xbox Series X.
No, that's slightly problematic. Yeah.
I hope Game Science can fix the PS5 version before the Xbox version. I mean, it's like a five-alarm fire.
It's not actually, fundamentally challenging things that we're asking for there. So,
no, I don't think so.
Okay, let's move on. So the topic of Black Myth Wukong is, dominating the discussion at the moment, and we've got another question here from someone. Just someone. Black Myth Wukong on PlayStation 5. Yes, they used FSR and not TSR. Why? This is an interesting question, right, Alex? Because obviously with the benchmarking tool that came along, I tested FSR and TSR. And TSR was producing, it wasn't perfect. It had issues of its own, but it was clearly better than FSR. Why do you think that FSR was used in the console version?
Well, if they did want to use FrameGen, if they were using an older version of FrameGen, it would have required FSR if it wasn't FSR 3.1. So that could be one of the reasons. They also could have had FSR in their previous build version of the game that was still on Unreal Engine 4, and they just kept it because they upgraded to UE5 mid-development. There's even reports about that online, like we switched to UE5. And also UE 5.0, which is what this appears to be based on for a lot of evidence, just the way Lumen works, the way Nanite works, the EXE of the game. TSR should be more expensive in the original version of UE 5.0. It didn't have Xbox Series X and PS5 specific optimizations put in yet. And that could be a reason to use FSR performance and just the availability. I do think it's a bad decision still. Like TSR, even in its less than great state, which Oliver showed, it's still better for a number of key image quality aspects versus FSR. And that's just the kind of way it is. I really hope they do also just give user control about that sharpening, which doesn't make any sense on PS5 the way it's used, and it just is so bad looking on PC in comparison to how the game could look. So I hope there's a lot that's done.
I mean, to that point, Alex, on PC you can mix and match the FrameGen with TSR, so that could be
great.
That could be the case in consoles as well. But I would really stress the TSR in Black Myth Wukong is not the TSR you're used to. It's really not that good. To the point where I finished recording with Alex on Wednesday morning, I spent an hour and a half double checking the quality mode was actually using FSR, not TSR. The particular scene that I have was that wolf fight, which I expected would bring out the worst in FSR and possibly the best in TSR. It looks so similar. Like the aliasing presentation was so similar. Now there are areas where TSR does better. Absolutely. Like the foliage presentation is a lot better. It's a lot less flickery. But for me in that scene, I was really struggling to tell the difference. I mean, it's not TSR. It's not a revelation in this particular game. In that context, it's got less ghosting. It's got less flicker, but it's not a salve for this game. They really need to upgrade their Unreal Engine version or get the new version of TSR in there somehow. It's not.
That'd be
it's
great.
Not going to fix anything. Not fix that much, at least.
Yeah, fair enough. I just hope that we get to see some patches and improvements further on down the line for this game, because it seems like the fundamentals are kind of there, but there's some really weird decisions there. And I think you speculated, Oliver, it's maybe because they're not so experienced with console development.
Just the conventions of console development, like how do you compromise the game in the right way? What are the conventions of targeting frame rates and things like that? They just pick totally different decisions than I've ever seen before. So it's just very unusual.
Okay. Let's move on. Another question about BMW, Black Myth Wukong. Huge games, lots of questions. Hi folks, ! Says Richard Led best. Sony shouldn't be happy with the performance of Wukong on PlayStation 5 as explored by Oliver and Alex, and yet they might just be, seeing how they could finally have a much-needed selling angle for a Pro console on their hands here, don't they? This is, well, okay, look, first of all, I think we kind of have to dispel this notion that developers, publishers, platform holders have nefarious schemes to nerf games in order to upsell you to something else. It just doesn't happen. Everyone wants to put out a great product. It is completely counterintuitive and doesn't make a commercial sense whatsoever to actually deliberately make your product bad in some way. Maybe I'm wrong here. I don't think there's any historical precedent for this, for it to be done intentionally. However, I guess this question could be, bearing in mind what we know about the PlayStation 5 Pro, and let's assume that the developer gets to grips with console conventions in the way you were talking about earlier, Oliver, what do you think a Pro console version of Wukong would actually look like?
On the positive side, to be more positive, I think the issues related to image quality could probably be ameliorated to a significant degree, could probably be solved through the PlayStation 5 Pro, hypothetical PlayStation 5 Pro, possibly higher res rendering in there, maybe PSSR, and that could certainly help. But I would stress that with image quality in Wukong, some issues like the dithering on post-process effects kind of tend to supersede that. So they're an issue even on PC with some of the higher end anti-aliasing settings there. But with performance, again, don't want to harp on this. I'm not so sure because the issues they do have perf-wise are to some large degree problems of their own design, bizarre frame rate choices, and the quality and balanced modes. That's a complete cell phone. The use of frame gen in the performance mode, which probably is not necessary to reach high frame rates. I mean, there's some weird issues there. And of course, the PS5 Pro does not have a much faster CPU than the PS5, so traversal stutter should be pretty much the same as far as I'm concerned. Like, it should be pretty similar. Issues like that, where the game may be experiencing a CPU limitation for some reason, that should be quite similar. So I'd say in part, yes, but it has more to do with fundamental issues with the way the game is configured, and a couple performance areas of concern, like those traversal stutters.
I think it was pointed out quite strongly in your review that the actual graphics in the game are really good.
Yes, absolutely.
They've done a fantastic job there. Alex, what would you expect from a Pro console version of Wukong?
I would hope for image quality improvements. I would hope the modes change in general for all versions of the game, so that there is maybe what they should do is instead like a VSync option. Instead, just like VSync, like a cap option, like capped, uncapped. And don't keep like a billion modes maybe, but then for example, the quality modes, etc., could maybe scale up higher, presuming the CPU isn't the burden to getting to 60 often, based upon my Ryzen 5 3600 footage that I've gathered for the game, which that video should be out by now. It didn't seem to be the CPU was not the big issue. I was having to do 1080p optimized settings with like DLSS and like quality mode to get the 2070 Super up to 60 FPS in most scenarios, not all. It was just super GPU heavy, and I think that points to the fact that maybe a PS5 Pro and even just the base PS5 could have a very different 60 FPS mode if they designed for it. Obviously, I don't know everything, but I would really just hope for better image quality, because I feel like the game's image quality in all versions, if I'm complaining about image quality on PC, there's usually something pretty wrong, right? Like usually that is the thing that I'm talking about in video. That's the best part of a PC version in the more boring ports, right? So yeah, they should really fix that up, and including look at de-dithering the motion blur in the game. I have no idea what that is. I tried using Unreal Engine Unlocker to play with, there's a number of motion blur quality commands in Unreal, like separable blur pass, some sort of filtering mode. None of them did anything. I've seen dithered motion blur in Unreal Engine 4 titles before, very specifically that Tango Gameworks Tokyo title. My goodness, what is it?
Ghostwire Tokyo?
Ghostwire Tokyo.
Ghostwire,
That also has dithered motion blur in it. Kind of like this, but not as bad, probably due to the different level of sharpening in the game. So yeah, the sharpening just makes everything worse because like each little bit of motion blur dither has a black circle around it.
Yes.
It's so bad looking. But yeah,
if you want to fry your eyes, look at that dither PS5 performance mode. It is unbelievably bad. It is so bad.
The slow motion parts of your video
too.
Yeah, the slow motion parts of your video where you're just like fighting the boss and he's got like the fire effects too. It's just, and with the hit effects, everything, the fire, the hit effects, the motion blur, and the frame gen, it just looked like, blah. It was so brutal. And yeah, there's a lot of ways to fix that. They have nothing to do with the PlayStation 5 Pro.
Is there any reason to enhance the ray tracing as seen in PlayStation 5? Has it got ray tracing? Is it like the lower lumen?
It's the software lumen.
Software lumen, right.
I mean, hardware lumen, if the engine version they have supports it and their performance is there, there are pointed out issues with that. I think it could be nice to get rid of some of the SSR artifacts that the game has. Yeah.
Cool. Let's move on to the next question. This one from Stefan ST. What effect will the new Xbox quote-unquote exclusive strategy have on the next Xbox hardware? Do you think Microsoft is trying to make it as similar as possible to the next PlayStation, or are they trying to differentiate from Sony? What could be the differentiator? Well, this one's quite interesting. We kind of touched on it earlier. And basically, I just think you should go and look at everything Phil Spencer and Sarah Bond have said about next generation, and more specifically, their views on what the Xbox ecosystem actually is. And, I think the biggest giveaway has been Phil saying that he wants to see competing stores available on an Xbox console, which basically means, it really does strongly indicate a much closer association with PC, and that would be the differentiating factor with PlayStation, right? I think it kind of makes sense to kind of bring together Xbox and PC development, make it closer than ever before. It makes sense to improve the Xbox experience on PC because it's really not great at the moment. Something which, from a handheld perspective, they've already admitted to. So I don't think that Microsoft are actually thinking about Sony at all. And I actually think one of the reasons for that is that there's probably a lot of evidence for Sony thinking, well, maybe we should be making our hardware closer to PC anyway, because we really need to sell a lot of games on PC in order to recoup our development costs. Mm-hmm. All options are at the table at this point, as we've got no idea when this new hardware is going to appear. But I just think that the number one message that I'm getting from Phil Spencer from his recent interview is that we should expect change. And that's going to be fundamental change across the whole board. Our expectations of what we should want from a console, expect from a console, are going to change. And John's talked about this before, but what Valve has done with Steam Deck is absolutely fascinating. That is a PC, right? It's a PC built on Linux. You can access Linux on it. But what you have got is an experience that's built to be console-like, and it works. You've got the best of both worlds. I think that's fantastic.
Right.
Alex?
I also feel like aligning with PC is just the route forward. If they were looking at Sony, the differentiation there is just really big. This PS5, it can watch like 4K Blu-rays. There's a YouTube app maybe on it, but it is not a PC, right? But if you had an Xbox that was PC as well as a dedicated gaming machine with a different, like, much more game-orientated version of Windows on it, or just the new Windows has this option, well, then I feel like that is such a more interesting buy and differentiating factor. I also think it leads to maybe just like an interesting hardware question, like they can maybe branch out and do different things more. think it solves the issue also for Microsoft of, I think they're having issues with ports to a certain degree.
You're quite right. I mean, Sony are never going to port to an Xbox console, and barring some huge intervention or change in strategy. But if it is essentially a Windows machine that's capable of running other stores, it'll just happen.
Yeah. So you'll be playing God of War on your Xbox next. And you'll also be not having the weird issue of you not playing Black Myth Wukong this weekend, right? You also wouldn't have the weird issue where you're like the port is like undercooked on Xbox versus the other versions. Maybe it'll be undercooked on the PC version.
Well, that's the question we have to address, right? That's the big issue for me is that there are clear issues. You've highlighted them multiple times that happen on PC that may or may not happen on console, but there are definitely PC specific problems that really do need to be comprehensively addressed.
Yeah, and I think that requires Microsoft using a strong arm on DirectX and or just, I don't know how the way you do it, just like fixing certain things that are inherent to PC's current issues. That really shouldn't be there. And I'm a little embarrassed by Microsoft in this aspect. Like just reading that like Ryzen performance has been partially affected by Windows issues recently. Like I don't know, that makes me just like, but isn't Microsoft the one like the guardian of their own platform? Why is it so tumultuous? So yeah, if they are doing this route, that means Windows and Xbox integration needs to be so much tighter, and their focus on actual usable performance on Windows has to be razor. It has to be like just as good as they're doing on console, So,
yeah, the alternative to this is kind of, what you might call dual boot. Like everybody kind of wants a Windows partition on their Steam Deck, and then there's like a your standard Steam sort of division of that drive as well. But that, I don't think that would work. I think that's kind of like a hack that can only go badly wrong.
It's
really
not a unified vision also for the future. It's like Windows and then you turn on the gaming part. I don't know if that's so interesting at that point, actually.
Yeah. Any thoughts on this one, Oliver?
I mean, I completely agree with what you've said so far. I think flexibility has to be the differentiator. I think that probably does involve some level of PC integration. Could also involve that new handheld that Phil loves to tease, that presumably may or may not be coming. But this might be coming. Who knows? Or maybe it's a third-party integration. Who knows? But something with handhelds, presumably. But I think exactly how much faith you have in that concept depends on how much faith you have in Windows. And I don't have a lot of faith in Windows, I guess. I do have a lot of faith in Xbox. I think Xbox OSs are great. From the user perspective, I think Windows is not good. I've not used Windows as my daily driving operating system in 15 years. So I hope that maybe we can get some of the stuff of Windows that maybe works and not the interface that does not work for home console games at all. I mean, I just installed Bazite on my ROG Ally to get the SteamOS on there, and it's just a world apart in terms of the feature set. So if they can deliver a console version of Windows in the same way that the SteamOS and Bazite deliver a console version of Linux, then I think that's great.
Okay, cool. Excellent.
Awesome.
Let's move on. This question from Ostex78. Hello there, esteemed gentlemen. With what we suffered at the beginning of this generation in terms of marketing with the promise of reality-splitting visuals from a full-fat, quote-unquote, gold-top RDNA 2 boasting RT, VRS, mesh shaders and geometry engines, sampler feedback streaming, and let's not forget crazy I.O., including the ethereal but mainly just words velocity architecture, only for swathes of the development community to center around a path of least resistance, leaning on a combination of FSR, TSR, and DSR to get the best bang for the buck, delivering their visual feasts. Did Microsoft and Sony focus on the wrong features? What's your view on the features they should focus on going into the next generation to deliver on the promise of, quote-unquote, the biggest technical leap ever in a generation? Yeah. My sort of, input on this is basically it's going to be machine learning features. We've already seen Sony embrace it on PS5 Pro. We've already seen that DLSS has basically been a transformative feature in the PC space. We heard some revised figures on adoption of DLSS on certain titles at Gamescom. Certain titles are seeing up to 98% utilization of DLSS. The point is, at this point, that it's just, becoming hugely important. It's a standard part of the PC experience. It's got to move to console. And you can rest assured that Nvidia are not going to be sitting still there. Alex, what do you reckon?
Yes. I think
Yes.
machine learning. Yes. I feel like machine learning, because there is a whole kind of stratosphere of techniques that can be modified with machine learning to give better results. We've only seen it really branching into the denoising category of rendering recently, which is a huge part of ray tracing, though. It is the thing that makes our image coalesce. And if that research keeps going forward, as well as the other research that has been demonstrated most recently also by Nvidia, but there's other researchers in the field about using it to enhance material quality and texture quality, and presumably also at some point geometric quality, while reducing and keeping runtime memory lower and or shading costs lower by not having multiple passes of materials. These are all things that we actually want to see in games, and they're not the generative aspect of AI or machine learning. They're like the best inferencing aspect of machine learning. And I feel like that is a really big field that is only coming online now to a greater degree, and we're starting to see integrations in games, but it's going to just keep kind of growing. And I feel like that is such a big part of next gen. I'd also like to see the features of Unreal Engine 5, which is the engine at the moment. Like, I would love to see hardware intersecting with software there, not to see just like hardware acceleration of UE5 features, but just to make sure that they mesh better. Right now, hardware ray tracing is a bit incongruous with Nanite, and I would like to see them much more just better supported with one another. So those are all things I would like to see in the next gen. And I do think there was a little bit of an oversell of the current generation at its beginning. I think we said it even back then that people expecting 4K 60 were out of their minds. Like, real 4K 60 is like, that's like the Xbox One tier, PS4 tier visuals, maybe at best. With a real 4K 60, we knew already what the GPU level was in terms of raw bandwidth and things like that. That is the core limiting factor to high resolution performance usually. So yeah, that was dumb. But I still think there's some exploitation there in regards to things like mesh shaders, which we haven't seen so much so yet. So yeah, some of it, I didn't like the selling of it, but others I think developers haven't gotten their hands on yet, / they're expensive to get their hands on. It takes a while to develop an engine that actually does, I think there's some quotes that, like, once you hook up to direct storage on Xbox or the exclusive API for the SSD on Sony side, that the thing that is not going to be limiting your performance necessarily is I/O anymore. It really isn't, but your CPU game code is just not at all ready for that. So you're just bottlenecking some other part of the system at that point. So developers have to change all that before we start seeing bigger differences in those regards, at least in terms of loading times, I think.
Yeah. What do you reckon, Oliver?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if the decisions were bad ones to incorporate some of those features that this person has suggested, many of which have not been used extensively, because it depends on what the die area is and what the development cost is of those different features. And there are some big payoffs as well, like the decompression hardware and obviously just that raw SSD bandwidth in both systems that's been used very extensively. Sometimes you look at a PC that might not have some of that hardware and the results are not so flattering, like with TLOO Part 1. I mean, I guess some things are not really used, like sampler feedback streaming, but I guess what's the cost for Microsoft in particular, with some of the RDNA 2 features, I think some of the issues just come down to the fact that Sony was not in lockstep with them. It takes two to tango, and developers develop games around the lowest common denominator quite frequently. And so they don't take advantage. And obviously Xbox is a smaller platform than PlayStation 5. Maybe that plays a role in it as well. And also, some of those features weren't very good, like hardware VRS. It's just not very good. So
Right.
I think it's a mix of factors. But yeah, I think it's one thing to say, oh, sampler feedback streaming was a huge mistake. And it's another thing to say, okay, how much did it cost them to make that? Maybe it was cheap. Who knows?
Yeah, it seemed like a good idea. What can I say? Still seems like a good idea, a decent solution to VRAM management, because the cost of memory isn't going down. It just seemed like a really good idea. It just hasn't seemed to have wide-scale adoption. Maybe next gen, who knows? Maybe there'll be some variant of that technology. Maybe there'll be a software solution. I mean, it's pretty much what Unreal is doing in terms of virtual texturing, right, Alex?
Yeah, similar enough. I guess just the granularity is better with SFS.
Yeah.
And that's the key. And I think hardware enabling features that are exposed in an API, there's always they can go one way or the other. Sometimes they can see extreme broad adoption. I think ray tracing has shown that. But they can also just be completely forgotten about because there's too many you can either punch yourself in the face while doing them by accident. You can reduce some, like geometry shaders was the really great example of that, where we can really manipulate geometry now to do a lot more, but the cost of even just invoking it was just ridiculous on the hardware of the time. Wouldn't necessarily get better. So it was just kind of almost never used except for niche cases. So some of that could be that. So I think my word of warning to myself and also anyone else in the future is to just take everything with a grain of salt and wait 3 or 5 years to see actually how things turn out. Because some of those things are not so predictable because they advertise them, but you don't know but what's the hook that, the developers are going to want from it. And it's hard to know that.
Yeah. I mean, it's actually interesting that RT is in OSTEX 78's a lineup of features that weren't really used when it has actually been used. And Mark Cerny said that he was actually really surprised at the adoption of RT in launch titles on PlayStation. So yeah, there has been progress. It's just the whole range of features haven't been used. There's also PC to factor in as well. Maybe the proliferation of DirectX Ultimate just hasn't really been there to justify a lot of this stuff. Anyway, let's move on to the final question. This one from Neo Tokyo. Hey DF crew, I've been concerned about my RTX 4070 Ti's obsolescence in the next few years. I recently watched a YouTuber called Daniel Owen video on 12GB GPU's VRAM usage and saw that several titles with RT and FrameGen went above the 12GB frame buffer. Will this be another RTX 3070 situation where the GPU is capable but is held back by VRAM amount / bandwidth? Cheers! Exclamation point. Interesting point, Alex. I just actually Googled the video that was being referred to here by Neo Tokyo. A lot of Nixis games in there.
Right.
What do you make of this?
I don't know I haven't watched Daniel Owen's video here, so I don't want to say anything wrong, but if you're just looking at a game about the amount of VRAM it uses on something like a 4090 or 7900 XTX, you won't get an appreciation of what that actually means for performance when it is limiting. So a good way to do that would be, and it's even not the best way, would be a 4060 Ti, right?
Yeah.
Versus 8GB versus the 16GB version, and then you'd see what its effect is on in games switching on and off settings and or just running the same thing twice. And I feel like that is the best way to do it because you'll see either visual differences and or performance differences. The amount of, I've discovered over the years, just the amount of VRAM being used by a game is not indicative of the performance or the visual effect. So, because games will cache things, they will consume VRAM with no purpose. They will have memory leaks. There's a lot of reasons why they won't actually be using the VRAM in any sort of noticeable visual performance way. Okay, so there's that. The second thing is games have settings. You should be comfortable with turning them down. Not every setting actually matters for visuals if the performance is great. And the last thing is, I don't know if I would use Nixie's ports as a great example anymore for the be all and end all of video memory performance in games. They are a particular example of them. You know, they created a specific system to utilize system memory that stresses the PCIe bus with the user not knowing necessarily that is the thing that is limiting the performance in scenes. And so people make choices there about texture quality or even memory decisions that are a bit uninformed. And I feel like their ports are going to have to improve in that way. So maybe that'll improve and change in the future. But I feel like now 12 gigabytes at 1440p with reasonable settings are going to be really good for a long time. I think that is going to be fine, but I do not want to promise if you put on like path tracing and frame gen, that you will be perfect, because I know those things are consuming more memory. So I would also, I do wish it was 16. I do wish it was 16.
Yeah, I'm just taking a look at Daniel's video here. It's really comprehensive. It starts with the Nixis games, Ghost of Tsushima and Horizon Forbidden West, goes on to Hellblade 2 at 1080p, 1440p, a range of settings there. Same with Avatar, Alan Wake 2, Cyberpunk, including RT Overdrive, Resident Evil 4. That was a bit of a weird one in terms of textures back in the day.
That was a dumb one,
Yeah, Starfield, Call of Duty. I think, Daniel's top video looks pretty comprehensive to me. There's some interesting comparisons there between the 7700 XT, which is a 12 gig card, and the RX 6800 non-XT, which is a 16 gig card.
Right.
So that's an interesting way to do the comparison. Another one could be simply to take a 16 gig card, and I believe you can actually allocate memory in Windows that basically blocks it out from games, which might be another way forward to take a look at this. I think you're quite right, though, Alex, in that ultimately you want settings to have, to address not just today's games, but the hardware of the future. But that doesn't necessarily mean that using high textures rather than ultra textures is actually going to deliver a quantifiably worse experience, especially during the run of play. So, it is always a case of marshalling your resources on PC ports and, tweaking the settings to get best results. It might not be best of the best results, but for now, I think 12 gigs is a pretty good place to be for 1440p. I would concur with you on that one. Do you have anything to add on that, Oliver?
Yeah, I think it depends on the engine. Because in this case, the more Unreal Engine, the better. Because the engines scale VRAM differently, right? Some do it more elegantly than others. I also think people do need to play with their settings, like Alex said. But I also would say that the vast majority of PC GPUs have 12 gigabytes or less of VRAM, and people are targeting those PCs. And many of them have 8 gigabytes of VRAM, and obviously that's a bit of a problem, but most games can run just fine at reasonable settings at reasonable resolutions on GPUs with 8 gigabytes of RAM. You might not be able to turn up the texture settings to the maximum, unlike The Last of Us, but you should be able to get a good experience. And also, most console games are using, in the vicinity of 12 gigs or somewhere less VRAM.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
So if the console games are being developed around 12 gigs of VRAM or 12 and a half or 11 and a half or whatever people are tending to allocate, then why would comparable PC GPUs with a similar amount of VRAM not be acceptable? I think probably that should be fine throughout the generation, unless the PC ports are just coming in and not doing their job and allocating that RAM correctly. So, in general, I think it's probably not going to be much of an issue. And reported VRAM use and actual performance issues can be quite different things depending on the circumstance as well.
Yeah. Daniel's methodology is quite interesting. It's basically to look at average FPS and 1% lows. The 1% low idea is actually really good because, stutter is generally caused when, one cause of stutter is swapping textures in and out of memory across the PCIe bus, which you've noted several times in your content, Alex, can be problematic if there's constrained PCIe bandwidth.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Hellblade 2. Yeah. And as well as Ghost of Tsushima, where Ghost of Tsushima, it's like more like a constant issue. But in Hellblade, it's like periodic moments in the campaign where it happens.
Yeah.
I'm actually a little bit curious about why it is that way in Hellblade 2, given the Unreal Engine there. I don't know.
Indeed. Okay, that was the final question, therefore the end of the show. So if you liked it, please do like, subscribe, share, ring bells for things that may or may not happen popping up on your browser or phone. Store.digitalfoundry.net to gain access to the opportunity to purchase our merchandising wares, including this is the DF motherboard t-shirt that I'm wearing today.
Oh, hey, brother.
Yeah. DF supporter program. Join us, support our efforts, and gain early access to DF Direct Weekly, the chance to help shape the show, early access to various DF content, access to our amazing community. If you want the full fat DF experience, that's the place to be. But that's all from us on this one. Thanks for watching and supporting Digital Foundry, and I guess we'll see you next week.